Well, SCC, it's time for another midweek announcement video, and this Sunday we are into our first week in March, and that means it's Communion Sunday. So I wanted to remind you to have your fruit of the vine and unleavened bread, best facsimiles of those in your home. Have those ready for partaking communion together. Again, it's not the same as being in the hall and passing it around together, but we are called to remember the sacraments when we gather together, and we do that virtually online. So we want to lead through the communion service the same way. Second announcement that I have is as we come into the spring, my hope and my goal was through this last year of COVID, and it's weird to sit here and say a year hasn't quite gone the way we wanted to. There were quite a few teaching points that I wanted to cover throughout the year, and one of those things was actually spiritual giftedness. So what I'm considering doing, and I just want to see what kind of interest there is, and I'll put out kind of a little email to go along with this to kind of ask is spiritual gifts. I'm not sure when the last time here in the life of the church anybody has really looked at spiritual giftedness. What are the ways that possibly we're all gifted to do different things. So I've got this wonderful book, and hopefully it's not totally backwards, but it's Spiritual Disciplines for the Christian Life, and it's by Donald Whitney, and it's a fantastic kind of classic book. And as you can see, I'm a note keeper and taker. There they are. There's all the notes that I've used in seminars doing spiritual gift inventories, and that's not to pigeonhole people into serving a certain way, but allowing people to begin to see how God has created them and gifted them for life and community in the church. So what I want to endeavor to do is provide some spiritual gift inventories to whoever wants to do them, and then have like maybe a 2-week seminar. And if we're done this way, we can do it via Zoom, and if we're able to gather together, we can do those in the hall. But to just kind of talk about, what does this mean? Like, if you come up with a teaching gift, am I going to slam you down into the children's ministry? No, not necessarily. If you come out with a gift of serving, are we going to make you make coffee on Sunday morning? No, not necessarily. Those manifest in different ways in the life of church, but knowing how God has equipped you can help you to avoid frustration as you serve in areas that just don't resonate with the way that you are given life through serving. So we want to kind of go through that and help to find ways to plug people into different serving capacities in the life of SCC Sorrento, and be able to serve one another with joy, particularly as there's coming a day where they're going to say that we can return to church. And then eventually there's going to be a day where we can return to church as normal, and we're going to have to rebuild a whole lot of systems because we've been away from them for a while, and that's going to be a bit of a stretch. It's going to be a bit of a struggle. So if we can kind of get ahead of that and begin to figure out how are we gifted to be serving the body, we can do that better. So yeah, those are the two announcements. Just some communion this week, and future seminar / study for a few weeks, whether that's online or live, if we can do that, to be aware of, and you'll get more information about that in the next little bit via email. This week's question is kind of an interesting one, and that is, why do people do what they do during this COVID thing, right? So we got some people who are immersing themselves into studying all sorts of elaborate theories on why things are or why things aren't, or both ends of the spectrum. The virus is real, the virus isn't, masks work, masks don't, all of those kinds of things. Why do people respond the way they do in light of COVID? And reality is, it's actually it's a psychological simple thing, and you can see it manifest in all sorts of situations, but we've all heard there's the flight or fight response, right? We either stay and we fight something, or we run for our lives. But that's actually only 2 of 4 things that are in the responses. So there is fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. So the idea of the fight response is we resist the threat, we run away, we resist the threat, we try to overcome it. There's the flight, which is we evade the threat, we try to run away and be safe. There's the freeze, which is we're actually paralyzed by the threat, so we don't know what to do, so we do nothing. And then there is the fawn over the threat, which is we give in to the threat and do everything that we think we have to do to ensure our safety. So through this COVID pandemic, what we're actually seeing is this crazy kind of reality in human behavior where somebody might fight one part of the public health orders, but then actually flight another one, but then actually fawn over another one. And sometimes we end up with people in a mixed bag of responses and emotions. Things like they maybe don't agree with the way that churches are handling things, one side or the other, but at the same time they may actually agree with the way the government is handling things, but they may not want to have the vaccine, but they're totally okay wearing a mask. And you start to see all of these strange little bits of differences of the way people respond. And that is because we have usually in that flight, fight, freeze, fawn, two of them are kind of our default. We'll do two of them. So perfect example is if you look in animals in typical fashion, for example, dogs will fight until that moment where they think that they are overwhelmed, and then they will flight, right? They will run for their lives. So they will stay and fight, but then they will run. Whereas a cat will run until they're cornered, and then they will fight. And you can go through and look at a lot of different scenarios where we do the same kind of things. Like if you are a person that typically gets overwhelmed by situations, you might be a person who freezes in paralyzed kind of form, like when you don't know how to deal with everything, but then at the same time you might get to a spot where that's overwhelming, and then suddenly you just want to fight. You want to fight for your life, and then you have that process. So what we've seen in church is people kind of going through these kind of cyclical patterns that they have. And in case you're thinking that I'm making this up, you can go online and find all sorts of things like this. It was psychological. This is complextraumahealing.com, and this is what they've got here, right? The freeze, the flight, the fawn, the flight. They actually match up difference, right? Like it's not actually flight and fight that are opposite. Fight and freeze are opposite, whereas flight and fawn are opposite, right? You either stay and kind of be the pleaser to the threat that it is, or you flight, you try to get away from it, or you fight, you try to overcome it. The opposite is actually to freeze, where you do nothing, right? So lots of times we think flight or flight is the opposite, but it's not. So one of the things that as we're going through that is to realize that as you're dealing with people, and to realize that as you have conversations and as you work through difficult issues, people are responding in a habit for themselves. We all have these habitual systems that we've developed inside of ourselves. COVID pushes in on those, and we are kind of in uncharted waters as far as this hasn't been a normal year, and it's just wave after wave after wave of things where we've had to respond as people, and we've had to figure out, what do we do? And the reality is it hasn't been easy on a great number of people, because they're not used to being in this kind of survival mode. Whichever way they respond, it's all in survival situations, right? You are called to do one of these things because you feel you are being overwhelmed one way. So you either freeze, you fawn, you fight, or you flight, and it becomes a difficult thing. And one of the things to realize is that flight and fawn actually have an inner voice that drives you. So it's not people saying lots out there, but it's inside. And there's that inner voice of the flight is, we've got to do everything right to evade this thing. We've got to get away from it. And it's that escape into the thought, obsession thought, or action, which is compulsion action, to try to stay ahead of whatever's there. And this is the idea actually of lockdowns, right? It's not to fight it, it's to evade it. You get another one like freeze, where it's an outer voice, where you avoid the imperfection of others. You freeze because you see all of the things going on around you and you don't feel safe. So you want to tell everybody else that they have to stop what they're doing, just like you are. and it's to avoid contact is the kind of habit there. So we see that one as lockdowns occur and they tell us to all separate and all those kinds of things. Some people do that much better than others, and it's a response that is actually hardwired into us. These 4 responses, depending on who you are, which way you're going to do it. The fawn response is that you see the threat and you want to do everything you can to be perfect in it. You have to please the way that things are supposed to be. Whatever people are telling you to do, you're doing it, not in a fear response, but because you want to be the best at it you can be to keep yourself the safest. And this is that people-pleasing kind of process that goes on. So as people say, this is what we should do, you look at all of the things that we should do and we keep those rules and we try to follow that through. And the final one, fight, it's that we want control, right? We want to have power and a control over top of what's going on. And it's we'll correct others where we think they're wrong, and we'll correct what is going on in our understanding so that we can have the ability to fight whatever is in front of us. And you see this all throughout, where generally, people who are friendly and easy to get along with and quite enjoyable. COVID came along and they kind of became a little bit more prickly. They weren't quite so loving and kind because they wanted to make sure they were safe. So there was this response mechanism that occurred, and for some it was a real difficult thing. Put all that together and compound it with the reality that for a lot of people, they've worked this last year in the context of stress, right? We're stressed. Everything is stressing us out. It's the way the world is stressed. And a lot of people are starting to come to the realization now that we're not actually stressed out about everything. We've actually are going through the process of grief because we've lost the way of life that we're used to. We've lost all of the things that are normal to us, and we grieve that life has changed, and we don't know if we're actually going to get back there, right? At some point, they're going to lift the restrictions and they're going to say, go back to life as normal. But we all are beginning to have this sense of what is normal life. And over the next while, in the next few weeks and months, as we kind of, however long it is until we can get back together, and then even after that, one of the things I want to explore as a church is what will it look like in the future? What will we have to do differently to reach our community, to be effectively worship as God's people together in community? How will we recover from, because let's be honest, this is the first of a kind of perplexing pandemic where when you look at it, the numbers kind of, they show us that it is a dangerous virus to particular age groups and subsections of the population, but by and large, it seems that yes, you'll get sick with it. Yes, it will not be in your best interest to have that happen to you, but for a great many people, they will recover and it'll be all right. But yet there's still a subsection that we want to protect and keep safe and to honor. We have a government that is willing to take extreme measures to try to control and work through that process. And we're taking a vaccine here over the next while that nobody's really too sure exactly what it's doing. So going forward, we're going to live with some of this oversight for a while, I think. I think we're going to see some of these things kind of linger. The lockdowns, the masks, whatever it might be, something is going to linger from this. And as we return to worshiping together, we as God's people need to figure out, how do we do this? Why do I know that we have to figure out how to do this? When you look back at the history of God's people, it's not outside of the realm of possibility that their lives were turned upside down. Right? If you go back to the Old Testament, we have stories of some brothers who took one of their brothers who was having dreams about how they would all bow down to him. They chucked him in a well and sold him into slavery. And everybody assumed that was going to be the end of the story, but that brother that was chucked down the well ends up in Egypt, and then all of a sudden there's a famine in the rest of the world, and he has the upper hand because they've got all the food because he was a wise manager of what was going on. And we all know the story of Jacob and his brothers, and as they come down the brothers come down to Egypt, he gives them stuff, and then eventually through a bunch of things that happen, he hides some treasure in the camels and grabs his younger brother and imprisons him so that they'll bring the father down. And then all of a sudden, all of God's people are now living in Egypt. And fast forward a few more years, and they're all slaves. And they're making bricks, and they're needing to be delivered, and life changes, and they have to come back, and they come back to the promised land. And then you fast forward again, and then suddenly they're in slavery again to the Babylonians. And then you fast forward again, and they're being oppressed by the Romans. And it continues on and on and on and on. Reality is, God's people have always been called to figure out ways to worship him in the context that they're in, so that the community around them can see what's going on, can see God being worshiped. That's what we're called to do. So in spite of this response mechanism that we have, in spite of trying to wrestle through the grief of life has changed and we're not sure how we're going to manage to move forward, we need to overcome these flight, fight, freeze, fawn mechanisms so that we can get back to the primary thing that we're called to do, which is to worship Jesus with all that we have in us, right? How we do that is going to look different. I can almost promise you it is going to be in structure and in function. It is going to look somehow different than what it was before. We're always going to have a fear of, are we safe? Are we doing things that are keeping our people safe? Are we doing things that are keeping our community around us safe? And are we reaching them with the love of Jesus Christ and the gospel message in a way that actually communicates that we care, right? And that's something that we're going to have to wrestle with over the next coming days, weeks, and months. So yeah, why do people do the things that we do? It's survival mechanisms coupled with, I think, a complete misdiagnosis of what we're actually worried about. It's not that we're stressed in a lot of instances, it's that we're grieving the loss of life as we understood it, and we're uncertain about what the future is going to look like, even though hopefully it will feel very normal. We know that it's going to actually be different. How do we lean into that? We lean into Scripture. We lean into Jesus. We lean into the gospel message, knowing that nothing changes the fact that Jesus redeemed us at the cross by shedding his blood for forgiveness of our sins, was taken off of the cross, put in the grave, but yet he rose again, resurrected so that death would be defeated. Death doesn't have its sting. So we realize that sin has no hold on us, death has no claim over us, because we have been reconciled to God the Father through Jesus Christ the Son. That is the hope eternal that we have. That is why we can walk through this knowing that we are okay. We don't have to fight. We don't have to run. We don't have to freeze. We don't have to fawn over it. We just have to be faithful to what Jesus is calling us to do as his people in this community, worshiping Jesus, so that those people around us can see us do that. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. I'm not a real great psychology guy. If you need that kind of stuff and you want some counseling help, we have Redemption Counseling in Salmon Arm. You can always get in contact with Pastor Richard, and you can set up an appointment to talk at length on those kinds of things. I would love to have conversations with you as best we can. So if there's things that I can help work through with you, I would love to do that as well. Biggest thing is to take away, we will return to worshiping together in one physical location. We don't know when, we don't know how, but we know that it's coming. So as in all things, we're called to be ready for that. We're called to be prepared. And we're called to, when we finally gather together, to do all of those one another's to each other. If you want a good study, look up the one another's in Scripture and realize, how are we supposed to care for, love, look after one another? How are we supposed to act to and with one another for the glory of the gospel, for the glory of the Son and glory of the Father? So something for you to ponder on. Love you guys. Miss you. Looking forward to those moments where we can be together on Sunday mornings, because preaching to more than a handful of people would be awesome. But I know that we have to be patient and wait that out. And hopefully we'll get some announcements soon that will allow us to understand how soon can we get back together in a physical location. So yeah, there you go. That's the information for this week. We'll see you Sunday morning, 10 a.m. on Facebook and on YouTube as soon as we can get it uploaded after the service is over. All right, have a great week.